All right, so let's talk about something a lot better than Monster at Go-Go. And by better, I mean it's still a bad movie, but it was a much more entertaining movie.
I kind of like The Incredible Melting Man. I've got to be honest. I started watching it. I got about 15 minutes in. I'm like, I should stop and wait for Kirby to come home. But I didn't. I just watched it through the end. I'm never sure when he's going to get home. And then he got home towards the end, and I'm like, you got to see the beginning. So he ended up having the not the Inception, the Tenet version of the movie where he saw like the last quarter, and then I started playing it again, and he watched the first 75% of it, so he saw the whole thing.
Excellent.
It's not a great movie, but I was entertained. Okay, I get to do the synopsis.
You get to do the synopsis. Warning: spoilers for this and any movie we may talk about. Spoilers. This movie is from 1970. Oh shoot, I forgot.
Yeah, and this is way more a 70s movie than the last
we basically skipped the 60s movies on accident. Maybe we'll throw another movie in some week, but 1977 is when this is from.
So I kind of want to joke. According to Wikipedia, Mystery Science Theater's actor and writer Mike J. Nelson described the plot as, the plot is, and I'm not kidding here, the plot is a guy is melting. That's the plot. But to give a real synopsis, some astronaut, it's apparently the future, although you'd never know it because some astronauts are out in Saturn's rings or something.
Yeah, I don't understand.
Something strange happens. They come back. One of them is melting, and as he melts, he kills people. And there is a poor beleaguered doctor. Because of the secrecy around this, like only a few people know. And this poor doctor, whose name is Ted Nelson, which you will not forget because it's like a joke to say his name as much as possible in this movie, tries to find him. And then eventually he melts. End.
That's it right there.
So looking into the background of this movie, there's some interesting things. There's Rick Baker did the makeup and stuff.
That is literally the one thing I wanted to say at the front is Rick Baker.
You can talk about Rick Baker. Let me go into the part I want to talk about, which is that the guy who directed this, I have actually seen one of his other films, which is Galaxina, which is also, it has Dorothy Stratton, who's almost more famous for being murdered, for being Peter Bogdanovich's girlfriend and being murdered than for much of her career. But she was a Playboy playmate who did some acting before getting murdered as a very young woman. He also worked on The Exterminator 2, which I've never seen, or have I watched that? I know Red Letter Media did it, and I may have actually watched it at some point. Neither of them are very entertaining, but apparently this director liked Buñuel, who came up in our Robot Monster conversation.
Why Buñuel? I didn't expect him to show up this month.
Yeah, apparently. So the director's name is William Sachs, and he has directed some movies, and this feels like more of a movie than some of the movies we've been watching. And he has said that he is, according to Wikipedia, influenced by Fellini, Buñuel, and others.
Huh. That's very odd.
And he is also I guess he's some kind of movie doctor, or film doctor, so he'll kind of re-edit and release stuff. Yeah, but this film got re-edited, despite the fact, like, I don't think he got to do it. So they added some stuff to it, and it was supposed to be funnier, I guess, but I still found parts of it incredibly funny. And this may be because I too like the surrealist and find it very funny. So my favorite moments of this was just Ted Nelson's blue collar job hunting down this melting man, because there is a conversation between him and another doctor where they're writing some kind of thing that's making a lot of noise, and they're just talking about Ted Nelson's pregnant wife, and just that this is the third pregnancy and so on, and they're just having this chat before they go into how they're going to find the melting man. And later Ted Nelson goes home, and his wife brings home the groceries, and she went to Lucky, which is an old grocery store. We used to shop at Lucky.
I remember.
And she forgot the crackers, and he's like half describing to her how he needs to hunt down the melting man while he's getting irritated about the fact that the crackers,
those damn crackers,
he doesn't have his crackers. And it just feels like someone who just has a job they don't want to do.
Yeah.
And it's finding this man who's melting. Even to the point where she's like, well, how are you supposed to find him? You're a doctor. He's like, well, I'm going to use this Geiger counter. And she's like, what? He's radioactive? And he's like, just a little bit. And there's some really dry humor in this.
Yeah.
That I appreciated. Unfortunately, it devolves eventually into monster running around killing people, chasing it.
Yeah.
And I have probably seen more of those than you. And as a result, I kind of appreciate what this has for it that's unique, including young children smoking. Thank you, 70s. But like compared to something like Slithis or just any of, there's so many chase the monster around the forest, chase the monster around nowhere kind of movies that are bad but not amusing. I kind of wish I'd seen the director's original intent, because I really enjoyed the dry humor of just like, well, crap. Now I've got to find this melting man.
Yeah,
and there was some dark humor in the ending too, where like, I don't think we were supposed to interpret Ted Nelson's appeal to the melting man, who was once his friend, who was named Steve, and we hear Steve over and over again, almost as much as we hear Ted Nelson. Like, I think there was supposed to be some very dark humor in the sight of this man attempting to like get to the humanity of someone who looks like a melted wax candle.
Yeah.
And then gets shot in the head by the police.
Yes.
Anyway, I quite enjoyed Melting Man. So.
I enjoyed it too. I have to admit, life is busy and I can't always watch these movies on my TV. So I was actually cooking while I was watching this, but it was just basically the first half was really hilarious and like it was just so enjoyable. And in the second half, when you start to get more of the monster chasing stuff, it's not bad or anything. Like it's not like terrible, but it is less fun to watch. So I probably wasn't paying quite as much attention, but there's just these sections where it's like, no, Steve, no. And it's like,
they were doing that on purpose.
Yeah. Like I couldn't figure out what was going on. And it's like, once you told me, or somebody, or maybe it was Kirby, but one of you told me like, oh, it was intended as a parody originally. And I'm like, oh, well, that kind of that makes sense basically with what's going on. And like,
well, there's that sequence where where the random couple go home and like the door is open and there's blood on it. And he's like, wait, you wait out here. And she's like, really? Terrific. That felt a little tongue in cheek to me.
Yeah. Well, and later in that scene, she screams, because she's found her boyfriend, husband, whoever, dead. And then she's like in the corner screaming, and she stops. And I think the shot just holds on her. And then she like screams again. And it's fine. Like, I mean, who knows how people would react to that, but it just looks so silly. Like it's just silly at a certain point. Well, so Rick Baker is a very famous movie makeup guy. And I don't know his full career that well. I watched an interview he did on the podcast, and it's interesting. It was interesting to hear him talk about how like through most of his career, he's like, I really just wanted to make these props and nobody ever used them the way I wanted them to, which I mean, hey, that makes sense.
But I mean, talk about blue collar type situations. Like,
but like, so he's a famous makeup guy, and he did the makeup for the Melting Man is just, I wish, like it's not like practical effects are dead and we never do practical effects anymore. Usually people are going for realism, or they're going for something where CGI is what they end up using. Not always. There's still practical effects. But I would love to have more practical effects in movies because it just looks so cool, and we don't all need to be doing realism here. And like, it just looks so good. And it actually reminded me of RoboCop, because there's a scene in RoboCop where a guy melts basically.
And apparently it didn't.
And yeah, I was, as you were talking, I went down to the Legacy just to see what it said about it real quick. And that this inspired that piece of special effects makeup. And it's like, yeah, it just looks really good. I mean, at the front, you see like, he looks bad. And then in the room, the hospital room, he like starts melting a little more, and he gets a piece of cotton stuck to his face, and it looks pretty silly. And He runs
that
around
whole
and then
scene, that whole early scene with the nurse screaming and running down God knows
slow
where.
mo or something. Like, why is she running in slow mo?
There's
and runs straight through a door.
Yeah, just runs through a glass door, which, I mean, of course it wasn't actually glass because you can't actually run through a glass door that way. But also, like, it's this top secret spot, but like, no, like it looks like a storage space somewhere.
Yeah.
Like it's got a lot of that kind of bad movie stuff where they're like, here's a room that is playing this kind of room but doesn't look like that kind of room at all, kind of a thing.
But a moment later, like just in the next scene, we see like his face get even worse and like an eye just like pops out and rolls down his face and falls, and it's like, that's great. And at the end of the movie, when he's like finally, like, I guess he hasn't eaten enough living cells or something. I saw that somewhere, and it's like, what was that in the movie somewhere? Who knows? But he finally just fully melts, and it's just like gooey stuff, like the most gooey you've ever gooed. Like, it's so good. Anyways.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some problematic 70s stuff. Like, oh, did you notice this? So you notice the girl that's getting her pictures taken out in the desert with a strange man, which is the beginning of a lot of really terrible, like genuinely bad stories. But this is a 70s movie, so it's played for comedy. Did you notice something about when he was taking her pictures?
No.
He literally did not click the button once. He was just twisting the lens. He didn't press. No pictures were being taken, and I don't know if that was deliberate or if this is like how everyone who drives a car is constantly turning the wheels in the way that would make the car jerk back and forth. That's not how cars get driven. But yeah, he was not actually clicking the button, so he was not taking any pictures at all.
I had not noticed that.
And then he like makes her take her top on, and it's just, she's screaming, "Take your hands off me," until she steps back into another hand, which is the dead body of a fisherman who the melting man found earlier. So there's some 70s going on there.
Once, I mean, you know, the guy pulls her shirt down and she's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And it's just so 70s, and I'm like, this is just, I hope it helped her career or something. Maybe she wanted to do it. I'm sure that's not the truth, but you know. And also, you mentioned earlier, like, there's also police who just shoot our hero in the face, and I'm like, it is just a 70s movies, but in today's world, I take the stuff with police in it a little more. I take it differently.
They end up dead anyway, but
they do.
I thought that was part of what was supposed to be kind of a darkly humorous ending. Is like,
probably
at the end of the day, the police shoot him. Like, in a way, that's kind of like, it
might have been that's what it was going for. Weirdly, we're talking about it, I don't have a ton to say about this because it's kind of just enjoyable. Like, it's.
I liked it more than Galaxina or The Exterminator 2, William Peck's other work.
It's kind of, you know, it's the audio. I enjoyed the soundtrack to this movie. I enjoyed the creature effects. It
was a real movie, which is kind of more than at least two of the other movies we've watched.
Yeah, like the real reasons that this is a bad movie aren't the stuff I just mentioned. The reasons this is bad is because kind of the acting's bad a little bit, or at least or maybe it's intentionally bad, but whatever the result ends up being, really unsure.
Yeah.
And the situations and setups are kind of funky and don't make a lot of sense. Like, they are just doing the worst job ever. And of course, it's a doctor looking for the monster. And again, if this is a horror parody, that kind of makes sense. And if it's not, it's kind of just weird. So it's kind of just ends up being like, it's not a completely bad movie. It's like part of it's bad, good, part of it's good.
Yeah.
It's just kind of it's an odd little movie. It was very enjoyable though.
I mean, as someone like me who has watched Killer Crocodile and Slithis and just a lot of, this is what I kind of grew up watching, because I would just watch television for hours and hours, and there, you know, I watched a lot of random things on TV, and so there would be stuff like this, these kind of B movies of the 70s and 80s kind of a thing.
Right.
And so, you know, I weed through a lot of I don't know, my metaphor is getting all messed up, but you watch a lot of kind of stuff that's just kind of whatever, and occasionally you find something that's a little more interesting, and I think sometimes it even takes watching more stuff that's really dull to kind of see what sets things apart. And there's craft here involved, and there's dialogue that's actually kind of well written and tongue-in-cheek that I like. I really like the cracker scene. I really like, wait, Steve's melting, you really didn't get any crackers? Like, just like, because that felt, I like it when people approach a ridiculous situation like it's a job.
Yeah.
And even Star Trek The Next Generation has moments of that. Like, one of my favorite Star Trek The Next Generation moments is, it's almost always when Geordi is asked to do something that Geordi is fairly certain he can't do, but like he can't say no. Like,
right.
Are you gonna say Picard? Is when they're trying to solve some problem, and Geordi comes to the bridge and he's like, "Okay, we figured it out. It's gonna take a team of 140 years, but we can do this." And Picard's just like, "Never mind, we figured something else out." But it's that. I mean, because we've all had these moments in our jobs where someone has asked you to do something, and you don't want to do it, and you know you can't do it, but they're not going to let you get out of it. I don't know. Anyway.
Yes, no, that scene does fit into that group. Is pretty funny.
Anyway, yeah, so I'm not going to recommend this to most people, but if you're like me and you'll sit through Killer Crocodile just to see if anything funny happens, like, this is worth watching.
Yeah, this is, I mean, we're getting like 10 views on YouTube for this, so who cares? But if you're watching this because you like bad movies and you were curious, you probably will enjoy this.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting too. One really final note is the interesting thing about some of these sci-fi creature horror movies is that I think we saw it. Can't remember the title of it, but you'll have these movies. Actually, it almost happened with The Giant Claw, but that was I forget. Elmer Bernstein did the music, but you'll have one person that really knows what they're doing, and it'll be like Rick Baker, or Elmer Bernstein. Yeah. And then you think about something like Night of the Living Dead, but more actually Dawn of the Dead, where you get like a director that knows what they're doing, and you get George Romero and Tom Savini together, and then you have this kind of glorious combination. Anyway.
Yes.
That's it. That's all we have to say about that.
Go watch it.